The soft hum of the Arabian Gulf surrounded the private island like a whispered promise. Strings of golden lanterns swayed in the warm evening breeze, their reflections dancing on the dark water. On the horizon, Abu Dhabi's skyline glittered faintly, a distant reminder of the world beyond this secluded paradise. Mariam Al Zaheri stood beneath an archway of fresh white orchids, her diamond-studded veil catching the light of 1,000 candles. Guests murmured in admiration as she stepped onto the polished marble walkway, her designer gown trailing like a river of ivory silk. Mariam's father, Sheikh Youssef Al Zaheri, watched proudly, certain his daughter's union would strengthen their family's already prestigious ties. At the far end of the aisle, Saeed Al Nahyan waited with an effortless smile that masked his racing heartbeat. The groom's tailored kandjura was pristine, the subtle embroidery on his bisht a testament to his family's wealth and taste. To everyone present, he was the picture of devotion and confidence, a young tech magnate whose ventures in Dubai and beyond had made him a rising star among the Gulf's elite. Behind him, his best friend, Omar Al Fardan, adjusted the cuff of his dishdasha and forced a polite grin. Omar had been at Saeed's side through university, business deals, and late-night secrets. He knew what Saeed had buried in his past. Tonight, as violins filled the air and the scent of imported roses mingled with sea salt, Omar's chest tightened with unease. The ceremony unfolded like a scene from a dream. Whispered blessings, the soft echo of Quranic verses, and fireworks ready to burst later in celebration. Guests sipped saffron-infused tea beneath canopies of silk. Mariam felt her worries melt away as she caught Saeed's gaze, steady, reassuring, and tender. But beyond the circle of lanterns and laughter, a sleek motor yacht floated just outside the island's perimeter, its navigation lights dimmed. On its deck, Fatima Al Suwaidi gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles whitened. Beside her, two small children peered out at the shimmering spectacle they were never meant to witness. Fatima's brother loaded their small tender boat in silence, his face a mask of controlled anger. The first fireworks exploded overhead, painting the sky in emerald and silver. On the island, applause and cheers rose, drowning out the soft rumble of an engine approaching from the darkness. The celebration on Saeed Al Nahyan's private island reached its peak just as the night sky burst into a cascade of emerald and gold fireworks. Laughter and applause filled the air, mingling with the delicate strains of an oud player performing a classic Emirati love song. For Mariam Al Zaheri, everything felt perfect, until a faint mechanical hum reached her ears, out of place among the music and merriment. Several guests turned toward the shoreline. A small tender boat was approaching, its motor cutting through the gentle surf. Security guards exchanged quick glances but didn't react immediately. After all, the island had been leased exclusively for this wedding, and every guest was accounted for, or so they thought. The tender slid onto the sand with a soft crunch. Out stepped a woman in a flowing abaya the color of midnight, her face partially covered by a delicate black shayla. Even beneath the veil, her anger was unmistakable. Two children, a boy and a girl, clung to her hands. A tall man followed, a broad-shouldered figure whose stern expression was as sharp as the blade hidden beneath his kandjura. Guests fell silent, whispers cascading through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind. The oud's music faltered. The fireworks faded into darkness. Saeed's smile froze when he saw her. His blood turned cold. Fatima Al Suwaidi. "Who is that?" Mariam's mother whispered to her husband, her jeweled hand clutching his arm. Fatima stepped forward, the lantern light catching the tears streaking her cheeks. Her voice trembled at first but quickly gained strength. "Do you think you can erase me, Saeed? Do you think you can erase us?" She gestured to the children beside her. Mariam blinked, confused. "Saeed, what is she talking about?" The crowd murmured. Saeed opened his mouth, but no words came. Omar Al Fardan stepped closer, his jaw tight, ready to intervene. "She's mad," Saeed said finally, his voice strained but measured. "This is some mistake." Fatima cut him off. "No mistake." From a small clutch, she produced a folded document and a photograph. She thrust them into the air, her hand trembling. Our marriage certificate, our wedding photo, your family's seed, the one you abandoned. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Several guests instinctively raised their phones, recording the unfolding drama. Mariam's father stepped forward, his face darkening. "Is this true?" he demanded. Saeed glanced at Omar, whose silence spoke volumes. The weight of his own secrets crashed down on him. I thought it was over," he stammered. "Over?" Fatima's brother barked. His deep voice carried across the courtyard, silencing even the whispers. "You left my sister to raise your children alone while you built this empire, and now you humiliate her with this circus of a wedding." Mariam felt her knees weaken. The world spun around her as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. All the lavish details, the orchids, the chandeliers, the designer gown, felt hollow in an instant. She turned to her father, whose reputation in Abu Dhabi's high society depended on tonight's flawless union. His jaw clenched and his hand curled into a fist. Security guards finally stepped forward, but Mariam's father held up his hand. "Not yet," he said, his voice icy. "The truth will be spoken here." Saeed took a step toward Fatima. "Please," he hissed, lowering his voice as if the crowd could somehow be ignored. "Don't do this in front of everyone. Think of the children." Fatima's eyes burned with fury. "I am thinking of the children. They deserve to know their father isn't a liar who hides behind wealth and charm." Omar tugged lightly on Saeed's sleeve, whispering urgently, "We can fix this later. Get them to leave quietly." But Fatima's brother wasn't going anywhere. His gaze swept across the guests, pausing on Mariam, whose tear-streaked face revealed her heartbreak. "You should know what kind of man you were about to marry," he said, voice low but cutting. The tension thickened, heavy as the humid Gulf air. One of Mariam's cousins stepped between the parties, trying to calm things. But the children's soft sobs, confused and frightened, pierced the night. Mariam pulled back her veil, her voice cracking. "Is it true, Saeed? Did you marry her?" Saeed hesitated too long. His silence was answer enough. Mariam's breath hitched, and she stumbled backward. Her father caught her by the shoulders, his own fury barely contained. Guests began leaving the reception area quietly, some slipping away to call their drivers, others lingering to watch the scandal unfold. The once vibrant celebration now felt like a stage for betrayal. Saeed reached for Mariam, but she stepped away. "Don't touch me," she whispered. Her eyes darted to the children, his children, and something inside her broke. Fatima gathered her children closer. "We're done hiding," she said firmly. "You made promises to me to them. You don't get to erase us because you want a prettier life." In the distance, thunder rumbled, not from the sky, but from a second round of fireworks someone accidentally triggered, their crackling echoing like gunfire across the water. The sound made everyone flinch, the tension crackling hotter. Saeed turned to Omar, his expression pleading. But Omar looked away. The secrets they'd both protected were unraveling faster than either could stop. As the security team finally stepped forward to guide Fatima's group away, she raised her chin defiantly. "This isn't over, Saeed," she said, her voice ringing out over the stunned silence. "The truth has only just begun to surface." The lanterns flickered in the salt-heavy breeze, their golden light now casting sharp shadows across the marble courtyard. The celebration that had shimmered moments ago had dissolved into awkward murmurs and sidelong glances. Security hesitated at the edges of the gathering, unsure whether to intervene or leave the powerful families to resolve their own storm. Mariam Al Zaheri stood perfectly still, her veil trembling against her shoulders. Her father, Sheikh Youssef, remained at her side like a granite pillar, his jaw locked tight. His wife's jeweled bracelets clinked as she gripped her clutch, her face pale beneath its careful makeup. Saeed Al Nahyan's polished composure was crumbling. He paced near the fountain, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "You don't understand," he muttered to no one in particular. "This isn't what it looks like." Fatima Al Suwaidi's brother stepped forward, his frame blocking the lantern light. "It's exactly what it looks like. he said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. You deceived my sister, abandoned your children, and now you pretend this. He gestured toward the wedding canopy, the luxury. Isn't a lie. Fatima pulled her children closer, her black abaya sweeping across the marble. She tried to steady her voice. Saeed, I begged you for honesty, for them. Her daughter clutched the edge of her sleeve, wide-eyed and frightened. Omar al-Fardan glanced between Saeed and Fatima. His palms felt clammy and guilt knotted in his stomach. He'd promised Saeed years ago to keep quiet, believing the past would stay buried. But as Mariam's tear-streaked face caught the lantern light, Omar felt the weight of his silence like a stone around his neck. Sheikh Youssef, Saeed began, turning toward his would-be father-in-law. I can explain. There is no explanation, the sheikh interrupted, his voice low and controlled, more terrifying than a shout. You brought shame onto my daughter and her family. You dragged us all into your deceit. The tension deepened when a crystal champagne flute slipped from a guest's trembling hand and shattered on the marble. The sharp crack seemed to ignite something in the air. Several guests gasped. A few hurried their children toward the docks. Fatima's brother moved closer to Saeed, his fists clenching at his sides. You owe my sister an apology. You owe her everything you took. Saeed took a step forward. This is not the place. It's the only place, Fatima cut in, her voice shaking. This is where you chose to humiliate me. Mariam's breath came shallow and quick. Her heart pounded against the boning of her gown. She felt every pair of eyes on her, friends, family, business associates, people who had flown in from Doha, Dubai, and Riyadh to witness a fairy tale. Now they were witnesses to its destruction. A sudden gust of wind sent a lantern toppling into a centerpiece of dried palms and white roses. A small flame licked at the edge of the decoration before a waiter smothered it with a tablecloth. The brief flare of fire drew startled cries, deepening the chaos. Saeed tried to seize control, his voice rising. Enough! You don't know what I've been through. Fatima, you don't know what pressure I was under. Fatima's brother took another step toward him, eyes narrowing. You're not the victim here. Omar placed a hand on Saeed's arm. Let's step aside, calm this down. But Saeed shook him off. No, I won't let her destroy everything I've built. His voice cracked, betraying the panic beneath the anger. Mariam's father finally moved, stepping between Saeed and Fatima's brother. His presence was commanding, but his fury burned hotter now. My daughter will not stand here another second, he said, turning to Mariam. Come. Mariam hesitated, her gaze flicking to Saeed. The man who had once seemed so steady, so admirable, now looked small under the weight of his own choices. She turned away without a word, her gown whispering against the marble as she walked toward the docks. The sound of her departure seemed to break whatever fragile control remained. Fatima's brother lunged a step closer. If you think you can walk away from this without consequences, you're mistaken. Saeed's own anger flared. Stay out of my life. The children began to cry, their soft sobs echoing off the courtyard walls. Fatima crouched to comfort them, her hands trembling. Omar stepped between the men. Enough, this isn't the time or place. For a moment it seemed the confrontation might cool. But from the corner of the courtyard, a guest dropped a tray of glasses, the crash startling everyone. Fatima's brother flinched, his hand brushing the concealed pistol beneath his kandjara, a precaution he'd brought for the journey. His eyes met Saeed's, and for a split second the threat of violence hung thick in the air. Fatima straightened and guided her children toward the tender boat. We're leaving, she said quietly, though her voice still carried authority. But this isn't finished, Saeed. As she walked away, the tension lingered like smoke after a firework. Saeed stood rooted in place, staring at the departing figures. Omar glanced at him, his voice barely above a whisper. You've lost everything tonight. A distant roll of thunder, or perhaps another misfired firework, echoed across the dark water as the motor of the departing boat faded into the Gulf. The island, once a stage for love and celebration, now felt like a battlefield where trust itself had been wounded. The private island lay under a heavy silence after Fatima's departure. A few guests whispered nervously while others discreetly called for their boats. The scent of extinguished lanterns and trampled orchids clung to the air. Saeed Al Nahyan stood motionless, staring at the water where Fatima's tender had disappeared. Omar al-Fardin placed a cautious hand on his friend's shoulder. "Let's go inside, Saeed. This is over for tonight." But Saeed didn't move. His knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists. "Over? It's not over. She's ruined me." His voice cracked with a mixture of fear and rage. "Everything I've worked for gone." At the edge of the courtyard, Sheikh Youssef returned from escorting Mariam to safety. The elder's face was a mask of barely contained fury. "You deceived us all," he said coldly. "My daughter will have nothing more to do with you." Saeed spun toward him. "Sheikh Youssef, please, it wasn't supposed to happen like this." "You've humiliated her," Youssef snapped, "and you've shamed your own name." The remaining guests began retreating toward the docks, sensing danger brewing like a storm. Only the closest friends and a few staff lingered uneasily, uncertain whether to leave or intervene. A sudden commotion broke out near the perimeter of the island. Shouts carried over the surf. From the darkness, another boat approached fast, its motor growling low. Lantern light caught a familiar figure. Fatima's brother had returned, alone, his expression carved from stone. Security guards rushed to block his path as he leapt onto the sand, but his stride was unflinching. "Step aside," he barked. "This is between me and Saeed." Omar moved quickly, putting himself between the men. "Don't do this. Everyone's already heard enough." But the brother's anger had hardened into something dangerous. "You think you can humiliate my family, lie to my sister, abandon your children, and walk away unpunished?" Saeed's composure fractured. "I didn't abandon anyone," he snapped. "I had no choice, business, reputation, expectations." "Excuses," the brother spat. His hand hovered near the edge of his kandjara, where a pistol glinted faintly in the lantern light. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but hesitated. Confronting a powerful family's scandal was a perilous move in itself. Omar tried again. "Please don't do this here." A gust of wind toppled a decorative brazier, sending sparks skittering across the courtyard. They ignited a fallen garland of dried palms. Flames flared briefly before a waiter stomped them out, but the sudden flash deepened the tension. The brother's eyes never left Saeed. "Apologize to my sister. Right now, admit what you've done." Saeed's pride flared hotter than his fear. "I owe her nothing in front of these people." The words were gasoline on a fire. The brother's jaw tightened. With a swift motion, he drew the pistol. Gasps erupted among the few remaining guests. "She gave you her life," he growled, his hand trembling. "She gave you children, and you threw them away like—" Omar lunged forward, grabbing for the gun. The two men grappled, the pistol twisting between them. A shot exploded into the night, the crack echoing across the water. Birds startled from the palm trees and took flight. Saeed stumbled backward, clutching his chest. A dark stain spread across his pristine kandjara. For a moment, silence swallowed the island, just the hiss of the surf and the crackle of lanterns. Omar froze, the gun now in his hands, his breathing ragged. The brother stood shocked, his anger suddenly replaced by horror. "Saeed," Omar cried, rushing to his friend's side. Saeed collapsed onto the marble, his breath shallow and quick. The distant sound of engines, boats returning, or perhaps the Coast Guard, rumbled over the waves. Sheikh Youssef knelt beside the wounded man but did not touch him. His voice was a low growl. "This night will destroy us all." Guests screamed for help, some calling emergency services. But the island felt impossibly remote. Every minute stretched like an eternity as Omar pressed his hands to the wound, his mind racing. Saeed's lips moved, forming Mariam's name. But the only sound that escaped was a faint, broken gasp carried away by the wind. The night sky over the private island was eerily calm after the gunshot's echo faded. The only sounds were the rustle of palm fronds and the anxious murmurs of guests huddled near the docks. Fireworks lay forgotten, their golden casings scattered like debris from a celebration that had turned into a nightmare. Omar al-Fardan knelt beside Saeed Al Nahyan, pressing his hands against the bleeding wound. "Stay with me, Saeed, stay with me," he whispered, his voice trembling. Saeed's breaths came shallow and uneven, each exhale weaker than the last. "Sheikh Youssef," one of the security men said, his voice tight. "The Coast Guard has been called. They're on their way." Sheikh Youssef stood rigid, his white bisht now streaked with blood where he had tried to help. He looked older, smaller than he had just hours ago when pride and family legacy had carried him. "Get the guests off this island," he ordered quietly. "No more eyes on this disgrace." Fatima's brother stood apart, his face ashen. His pistol now lay on the marble, abandoned. His hands trembled violently as he stared at Saeed. I didn't mean," his words cracked. "Don't speak," Omar hissed, anger and panic colliding. "Not one word." Mariam's mother approached cautiously, her silk gown dragging across the wet sand near the fountain. "Youssef," she said, voice shaking, "we need to get Mariam off this island before the press hears." Youssef nodded grimly. "She doesn't need to see this." On a distant yacht, the first blue and red flashes of emergency lights appeared, growing brighter with each second. The sound of approaching engines broke the island's fragile silence. Fatima's brother finally collapsed onto the steps near the courtyard fountain, burying his face in his hands. Fatima, who had returned on a second boat after hearing the shot, arrived breathless. Her abaya billowed around her as she ran to the scene. When she saw Saeed crumpled on the ground, her breath caught in her throat. She froze, torn between anger and heartbreak. The man she'd loved, betrayed by and betrayed her, now looked small and fragile, a shadow of the confident Groom from just hours ago. Her children clung to her legs, their wide eyes absorbing far more than they should ever have witnessed. Omar's voice was raw as he shouted to the arriving medics, "Over here." The Coast Guard and paramedics disembarked quickly, their radios crackling. Two men began working on Saeed, stabilizing him for transport. They moved efficiently, but the grim set of their faces betrayed the severity of his wound. "Sheikh Youssef," one officer said respectfully, "we'll need statements from everyone." The elder nodded. "You'll have them, but get him to a hospital first." As the medics lifted Saeed onto a stretcher, Omar followed closely, his hands shaking. He didn't even notice the blood on his kandjura or the cut on his own knuckles from the earlier struggle. Mariam watched from the dock, half hidden behind her mother's arm. She'd come back when she heard the sirens, needing to see with her own eyes what she had prayed was untrue. When Saeed's pale face passed under the lantern light, her breath hitched audibly. She turned away before the tears could fall, her chest heaving silently. Fatima stepped forward, her voice a whisper to no one in particular. "This wasn't what I wanted." Her brother glanced up at her, his eyes haunted. I wanted him to tell the truth," she said, her voice cracking. The officers quickly secured the pistol in an evidence bag. The once lavish courtyard now felt like a crime scene. Broken glass glittered on the marble, orchids lay crushed under hurried footsteps, and the faint scent of gunpowder clung to the warm night air. As the last of the guests were escorted to boats, the media began to circle the area, tipped off by someone on the mainland. Distant flashes of cameras sparkled across the water. Omar stayed by Saeed's side as they loaded him into the Coast Guard boat. He leaned close, voice low but urgent. "Don't give up, brother, don't give up." Saeed's lips moved faintly, but no words came. Fatima held her children tightly, feeling their small bodies tremble. She wanted to weep, to scream, to take back every choice that had led them here. But all she could do was stare at the blood on the marble and whisper a prayer for forgiveness. Sheikh Youssef placed a protective arm around Mariam as they stepped into their boat. "This will be handled," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Mariam kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the city lights of Abu Dhabi sparkled, so close, yet impossibly far. As the boats pulled away, the once celebratory island lay empty except for a few scattered petals, burned-out lanterns, and the echo of promises broken. The Gulf waters swallowed the sounds of departing engines, leaving only the whisper of the wind and the unspoken truth. Nothing would ever be the same. By dawn, Abu Dhabi's skyline gleamed under a rose-tinted sky, but on the mainland, whispers of the tragedy had already spread. By mid-morning, major news outlets and gossip blogs were buzzing with unconfirmed reports. Prominent wedding turns to chaos, gunshot heard on private island. The Al Nahyan and Al Zaheri names dominated every headline, their reputations now entwined in scandal. At Sheikh Khalifa Medical Complex, Saeed Al Nahyan remained in critical condition. Omar al-Fardan sat hunched in a waiting room chair, his kandjura wrinkled, hands still faintly stained with blood. He stared at the floor tiles, replaying the moment the gun fired. A nurse's soft voice interrupted him. "The police are ready to speak with you." Detective Nura al-Hamadi, a composed woman with a reputation for handling high-profile cases discreetly, entered with two officers. She carried a small tablet and an air of quiet authority. "Mr. Al-Fardan," she began, "we need to establish what happened on the island. Your cooperation is crucial." Omar hesitated. "It was an accident," he said finally. "Fatima's brother, he wasn't planning to shoot. There was a struggle." Detective Nura nodded but made no comment, her stylus moving quickly over her screen. "And the weapon, was it registered?" Omar swallowed hard. "No, he brought it for protection." He rubbed his temples. He didn't mean to. Saeed provoked him. Meanwhile, Fatima Al Suwaidi sat in a separate room, her children asleep on a bench nearby. She wore the same midnight abaya from the night before, now creased and damp with seawater. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady as she addressed the detective. "I didn't want this. I wanted Saeed to tell the truth in front of those people so my children wouldn't grow up as a secret." She looked down at her hands. "I begged him for honesty for years." The officers exchanged glances. One whispered something about the social media frenzy outside the hospital. Dozens of photographers and journalists were gathering, their camera flashes already visible through the glass doors. In Dubai, Mariam Al Zaheri remained cloistered in her family's villa. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and acquaintances, most of them a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. She ignored them all. Sitting in her dressing room, still surrounded by unopened wedding gifts, she stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. A bride without a groom, her dream turned into humiliation broadcast across the Emirates. Her father entered quietly, setting aside his agal. "Mariam," Sheikh Youssef said, his tone softer than she expected, "the police will need your statement, but you don't have to face the press. Not yet." Mariam's voice was brittle. "They all saw, all of them." She gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the world outside. "They'll never forget what he did." Across the city, influential families held discreet meetings, weighing their ties to Saeed's business ventures. Investors withdrew funds quietly. Invitations were rescinded. In the Gulf's elite circles, reputations could be shattered overnight, and Saeed's name was now toxic. That afternoon, Detective Nura held a press briefing outside the police headquarters in Abu Dhabi. Dozens of microphones clustered before her. At approximately 23:47 last night, a firearm was discharged on a private island hosting a wedding celebration, she said evenly. The groom, Saeed Al Nahyan, sustained a gunshot wound and remains in critical condition. We are questioning witnesses and have a suspect in custody. This is an active investigation. Reporters shouted questions about Fatima, about Mariam, about the high-profile families involved. Nura's lips tightened. "We will not speculate on personal matters. Our focus is the criminal investigation." Online, the scandal dominated social media. Hashtags like Island Wedding Tragedy and Abu Dhabi Scandal trended across the UAE and beyond. Grainy footage recorded by guests circulated widely. Fatima's arrival with her children, Saeed's frozen expression, the chaotic aftermath. Armchair commentators dissected every moment. Some sympathized with Fatima, applauding her for exposing Saeed's deceit. Others condemned her brother's actions and speculated on whether Saeed would survive to face the fallout. In Sharjah, Fatima's extended family gathered to discuss next steps. Her brother sat in silence, his head bowed, as relatives debated lawyers and damage control. "You've endangered us all," one uncle hissed, but Fatima raised her head, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "He endangered himself. All I wanted was for the truth to come out." Meanwhile, Omar returned to the hospital room where Saeed lay unconscious, hooked up to machines. The rhythmic beep of the monitors filled the sterile space. Omar pulled a chair closer to the bed. "I should have told them," he whispered. "I should have made you tell Mariam." He reached for Saeed's hand, gripping it tightly. "Wake up, brother. Don't let this be how your story ends." Back at the Al Zaheri villa, Mariam sat on the terrace, gazing out at the Dubai Marina skyline. The city lights shimmered like distant stars. She remembered Saeed's proposal under a desert sky, his promises of devotion, his easy laughter. Now those memories felt like ghosts, beautiful but insubstantial. Her mother placed a shawl over her shoulders, but Mariam didn't move. Her tears had run dry, leaving only exhaustion. By evening, the scandal had become an international headline, carried by networks in London, Cairo, and Riyadh. The fairy tale wedding was now a cautionary tale, a reminder that beneath glittering appearances, secrets could destroy even the most powerful families. 2 weeks after the wedding disaster, Abu Dhabi's skyline glimmered under a harsh winter sun, but the city's usual sense of privacy was fractured. The island tragedy had become a cultural flashpoint, sparking heated debates on talk shows, blogs, and dinner tables across the Gulf. For many, the affair wasn't just about Saeed Al Nahyan's betrayal. It was about honor, family, and the consequences of arrogance among the elite. Fatima Al Suwaidi's brother was formally charged with assault and possession of an unlicensed firearm. When he appeared in court, dressed in a plain white kandjura and flanked by guards, the room was silent except for the rustle of papers. Outside, protesters carried signs, "Justice for Fatima, and no one is above the law." The press struggled to balance their coverage between sympathy for Fatima's plight and outrage over the violence that followed her confrontation. Saeed remained in the hospital, recovering slowly. His lawyers issued a statement claiming the shooting had been a reckless act that endangered everyone on the island. But the public was skeptical. Videos of Saeed laughing with Mariam at their engagement, alongside footage of Fatima's tearful accusations, painted him as a hypocrite, a man who had risked 2 families' honor for his own ambition. Mariam Al Zaheri, still cloistered in her family villa, avoided interviews. Yet every photograph of her entering or leaving a building was analyzed, her quiet dignity turning her into a symbol of betrayed women everywhere. Some pundits praised her composure, while others whispered that she might quietly annul the marriage once Saeed regained consciousness. In Dubai's coffee shops and on private WhatsApp groups, the debate raged. Was Fatima justified in confronting Saeed so publicly? Should the Al Nahyan family be held responsible for the chaos their son's secrets caused? A popular Emirati influencer posted a viral video. "A man cannot live 2 lives without one crumbling. This is not just gossip, it's a warning." Behind closed doors, both powerful families worked feverishly to contain the damage. The Al Zaheris considered withdrawing from joint business ventures with Saeed's relatives. The Al Nahyans, their prestige bruised, discreetly reached out to religious leaders and mediators, hoping for a reconciliation that would salvage their reputation. Meanwhile, Fatima, living temporarily with cousins in Sharjah, faced her own dilemma. Though many supported her, she knew her children's future now depended on a legal battle she couldn't fully control. Late one night, she told a friend, "I wanted truth, not blood, but now all they will remember is the gunshot." By month's end, the scandal showed no signs of fading. Hashtags about the island wedding still trended online, and foreign media speculated on whether Saeed would testify against Fatima's brother, or attempt to reconcile privately to avoid further embarrassment. The fairy tale wedding had become a cautionary parable, reminding the Emirates that wealth and status could not shield anyone from the consequences of secrets, betrayal, and pride. The Abu Dhabi courthouse was overflowing by the time the judge entered, the weight of silence pressing down on everyone present. Cameras were barred, but reporters waited outside like vultures, ready to dissect every word. Inside, Fatima Al Suwaidi's brother stood at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes fixed on the polished floor. Fatima sat behind him, her children absent, safely kept away from the scene. Across the aisle, Saeed Al Nahyan's legal team occupied the front row, their pristine canjuras and expensive watches a reminder of the wealth behind them. The judge's voice was firm but even. The court recognizes that the events of that night were fueled by deception and emotional distress. However, the law is clear regarding firearms. After a pause, he delivered the verdict, guilty of assault and possession of an unlicensed weapon. The sentence, 2 years in prison with the possibility of parole after one, was a compromise, harsh enough to satisfy public outrage but lenient enough to acknowledge the circumstances. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Fatima's shoulders sagged, relief and sorrow mingling in her eyes. Saeed's lawyers exchanged tight-lipped nods, but none looked triumphant. This was not victory, it was damage control. Outside, journalists swarmed the steps. Some celebrated the verdict as a win for accountability. Others speculated that private negotiations had influenced the outcome. Social media exploded again. Island wedding verdict trended within minutes, with Emiratis debating whether justice had truly been served. In the following weeks, Saeed made his first public appearance since the shooting, a brief, heavily managed statement outside the hospital. Pale and gaunt, he apologized for the pain caused to all families involved, but avoided directly addressing Fatima or Mariam. His words felt rehearsed, and public sentiment remained cool. Investors continued to distance themselves from his ventures, and whispers suggested that even his own relatives were urging him to live quietly for a while. Mariam Al Zaheri met with her family's advisors in Dubai, the annulment papers lying unopened on a polished oak table. She traced the edges of the envelope, remembering the warmth of Saeed's hand in hers on their engagement night, and then the shock on his face when Fatima arrived on the island. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady. "I will not let his mistakes define my life." She slid the papers back toward her father. "But I won't forget either." Fatima returned to Sharjah, determined to rebuild quietly. The whispers in her community were inevitable, but so were the small gestures of support. A neighbor leaving fresh dates at her door, an old friend sending a message of solidarity. Late one evening, she watched her children sleeping and whispered, "The truth is out now. That's enough." The private island, once a stage for opulence, stood silent again. Its lanterns gone, its marble walkway washed clean by the sea. But for everyone involved, its memory remained. A reminder that secrets, no matter how carefully buried, can surface and shatter lives under the brightest lights.